Hello, Rob here. So, the last thing we've got to do for the Component 1 first year media course is we've got to look at video games. And the set text we're going to be looking at is Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation. Now, in this video, what I'm basically going to do is go through the elements of the course that we need to study for this section. Subsequent videos will break it down into all the different areas, so the industry, the audience, the media context, etc. And I'll cover them in different videos, but this is just a brief overview. So, what are we going to be looking at? So, this learning will relate to Component 1 media products, industries and audiences, subject content, which is going to be media industries, audiences and media context. Now, you'll notice that these are all in Section B. You will only get video game questions. You will only get questions about Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation in Section B. So at no point will you ever be expected to textually analyse Assassin's Creed 3. You're not going to be expected to talk about the representations in it or anything like that, except in terms of how they relate to audiences. So you're not going to have to do any textual analysis. Obviously, we are not going to be able to play Assassin's Creed 3 in class, especially if you're listening to this in, April 2020, when we're all coronavirus locked away in isolation. So basically, you could have a go at playing it. I got Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation high definition version on the PC for about £7. It's currently in the, well, it was last week in the Steam sale. You can probably download it for consoles as well. I don't know how much they're going to charge you on that. Have a look. You don't have to have played it, but if you haven't played it, you are going to be expected to be aware of how the gameplay works, and you should have studied key sequences in it. So there are plenty of walkthrough videos on YouTube, and if I can get it to work, I will record myself playing the game and doing a voiceover analysis of it as well. So you got that to look forward to. Right, so what are we looking at? In this section, you, the learners, must develop knowledge and understanding of key aspects of media industries, including the significance of ownership and funding, the role of regulation in global production and distribution, the impact of digitally convergent platforms, and the effect of individual producers on media industries. In addition, learners, that's you, will study media audiences, considering aspects such as the targeting of mass and specialised audiences, the categorisation and construction of audiences, as well as how audiences respond to media and how that reflects their identity, social, cultural and historical circumstances. That one in particular is one we've not really looked at a lot because it's not really relevant to what we've been looking at, except for newspapers. So, and I suppose Late Night Woman's Hour too. But we're going to go into more detail on that one. So just to remind you what goes into the course so far, essentially in Section A, you've got advertising, so that would be the Tide print aid and the water aid audiovisual advertisement. They will appear in Section A, but they also appear in Section B. What you'll notice there is, of the advertising products, the one that doesn't appear in Section B would be the Kiss of the Vampire poster, which I have used in mock exams for Section B, but you wouldn't get it in reality. For film, you will also get Black Panther and I, Daniel Blake. So for the film marketing, you'll be expected to be able to analyse those. And for newspapers, you'll have the Daily Mirror and the Times. Now they can appear in Section A or in Section B. But Late Night Woman's Hour and Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation will only ever appear in Section B. You won't get them anywhere else. So, in particular, for Assassin's Creed 3, you've got to have knowledge and understanding of Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation as a contemporary action-adventure game, in terms of relevant video games industry and the audience issues it illustrates. Notice that this is Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, not Assassin's Creed 3. They are very different games. Assassin's Creed 3 was a PlayStation 3 title, but Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation was, at first at least, exclusive to the PlayStation Vita, which was the handheld portable PlayStation console, which has recently been discontinued. Eventually it was ported over to other platforms, but initially it was only on the Vita. Although the two games were released at the same time, and if you bought both of them, there were certain levels you could only do if you had both games on both platforms. In order to develop this awareness, learners should consider at least one extract from the game chosen by the centre, which may be accessed online. So, as it's saying, you don't actually have to have played Assassin's Creed 3. You could have just looked at the walkthroughs and stuff, but, you know, like you've got anything better to do in lockdown, have a go at it. Right, so what else we got? Key theories. What are the key theories you need to be looking at? Well, Power in the Media Industries by James Curran and Gene Seaton. The idea that media is controlled by a small number of companies primarily driven by the logic of profit and power. Well, obviously these are video game companies. We're going to be looking at Ubisoft. They're the company behind Assassin's Creed 3. And we're going to be looking at how they are, you know, part of, well, they're an independent company, but they're obviously working with other companies like Sony, for example, with the PlayStation. But they are themselves vertically and horizontally integrated, and we'll look at that. We're looking at the idea that media concentration generally limits or inhibits variety, creativity, and quality. This is very true of the video game industry. Even more so than the film industry at the moment. The big, what we call AAA video game franchises have dominated. If you'd have gone back to, you know, even the days of the, you know, the PlayStation 2 and Xbox, and to a lesser extent, I guess, the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, you had a far greater variety of game titles available. Much more in the way of independent titles that you could play, much more variety. Nowadays, it's franchises like, you know, Call of Duty, for example, or Final Fantasy. They're totally taking over. There are much fewer independent original titles around. It's all sequels, reboots and franchises, and Assassin's Creed is no exception to that. So we've also got the idea that more socially diverse patterns of ownership help to create the conditions for more varied and adventurous media productions. To be fair, there are a lot of independent games available on platforms like the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, and there are entire communities of people developing these independent games, but they're not, you know, they're very small fry compared to the big franchises. So it's very similar to the film industry in that respect. Then we need to look at regulation. So we need to be considering Sonia Livingston and Peter Lunt here. So this idea that there's an underlying struggle in recent UK regulation policy between the need to further the interests of citizens by offering protection from harmful or offensive material, and the need to further the interests of consumers by ensuring choice, value for money, and market competition. Now, this is a particularly important theory when looking at video games. Video games are very much considered a moral panic and a folk devil. There are lots of moral panics around video games. Every time there's a high school shooting in America, who gets blamed? The video game industry. Not the fact that you can wander into Walmart and buy a high-powered rifle. You know, but whatever. The idea that video games in particular, because they're considered a more active kind of media in comparison to, say, film, that there's a big debate about if you were enacting, in inverted commas, violence in a video game, because you are controlling the avatar that's doing the violence, that it has a greater influence over the gamer than passively observing acts of violence in, say, a movie might have. So there are people who've described video games as being like murder simulators. So there's always, as long as video games have been around, I mean, going right back down to the very early days of, Space Invaders and Pong, that video games have been linked to causing violence in the media. So we want to look at this nature-nurture debate and the effects debate and things like that. So there's that element. The idea that the increasing power of global media corporations, together with the rise of convergent media technologies and transformations in the production, distribution and marketing of digital media, have placed traditional approaches to media regulation at risk. Well, in this respect, remember that, if we'd have gone back to even a generation back to the early days of PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, certainly in the PlayStation 2 Xbox era, games were mainly bought on physical formats. Even though you were always able to download games on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, in the very early days of those being released, not everyone had the kind of access to high-speed broadband that made it possible. So even in those days, most of the games came on shiny plastic discs. And that was true at the time of Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation being released, I'd say. Of course, nowadays, increasingly, games are more likely to be downloaded off whatever it is, PlayStation Store, for example, off Steam, or even if nowadays streamed, quite frankly, if you're using Steam or Steambox or something like that. But that doesn't really apply to Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, but it would apply to the more recent games. Although, frankly, I downloaded Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation. I did not buy it on a disc. I got off Steam. Then we've got your key theories, your cultural industries, David Hesmagulch. The idea that cultural industry companies try to minimize risk and maximize audience through vertical and horizontal integration and by formatting their cultural products through the use of styles, genres and serials. Well, I've already said that. I've just been talking about the fact that, the franchises in particular are taking over the video game industry more than pretty much anything else, and even film. And that even independent companies like Ubisoft, who are one of the biggest video game studios, they are within themselves horizontally and vertically integrated. They're not necessarily conglomerates as such, but they will have their own subsidiaries, and they're also able to distribute things. And they've, in the case of Ubisoft, they've got films. There's an Assassin's Creed 3 movie, so they've got a film production company. There's even been rumours they're making an Assassin's Creed television series, although that's not really come to anything. So, they're also doing all sorts of cross-platform promotions, so your games are on different platforms, and there's, cross-media transmedia storytelling and merchandising and all those other kind of things that go with this. So, yes, very true. The idea that larger companies and conglomerates now operate across a number of different cultural industries, well, I just said that. And the idea that the radical potential of the internet has been constrained to some extent by its partial incorporation of a large profit-oriented set of cultural industries. It doesn't really apply to this. Then we've got Media Effects by Albert Bandurras. We need to look at the effects theory. And as I was saying, this idea of moral panics and folk devils by Stanley Cohen, which is not one of the key theories, it's one of the stretch and challenge ones I've given you. But, video games have always been blamed for causing violence. So, every now and then a video game will come out that gets banned because it's so violent. Famous cause célèbre ones would be games like Bully, which you played a school bully, that got banned. I think you can get it now, it was banned originally. There are games like, was it Manhunt, which was banned on the Nintendo Wii because, this is a game where you go around cutting people's throats, but to do that you had to mime it with a Wii controller, and that was considered a step too far. Every now and then there'll be games banned because they can, especially some of the more obscure, weird, semi-pornographic ones from Japan. So, Every now and then there'll be ones banned. I haven't heard of any lately though. But yeah, I can't remember the last time I got banned for violence though, other than Manhunt. So there's this idea that, why is that thought to be the case? Well, it's because of effects theory. We talked about things like hypodermic needle theory and two-step flow models. Lasserfeld Katz, Harold Laswell for that. Those are the very, very early effects theories. And Bandura took that with his Bobo doll experiment a step further. But it ultimately comes all down to nature-nurture debate, doesn't it? Okay, are human beings born violent or do we learn violence? Is exposure to violence in the media more likely to make us violent? Do we copy the behaviour that we see? Bandura said yes. He says the idea the media can implant ideas into the mind of the audience directly. I think that's an idea that's largely been rejected nowadays as being stupid. But having said that, if he wasn't partly true, then there'd be no advertising, would there? Because advertising wouldn't work. The idea that audiences acquire attitudes, emotional responses, and new styles of conduct through modelling. So that's the key thing here. It's that modelling idea that we see. I mean, if you remember the Bobo doll experiment, he put a bunch of kids in a room with this big inflatable doll and a bunch of other toys and watched what they played with, and most of the kids ignored it. But then he took another group of subjects and he showed them a research assistant beating up the Bobo doll first and then shoved them in the room with it, and they all beat up the Bobo doll. So his argument was that we copy our behaviour from role models, like adults. And, if we see people in the media that we see as yourself, for example, an aspirational role model, I mean, the obvious one would be something like James Bond going around killing people. Is that going to make us think, oh, killing's a good thing? And as I said, with video games, there's that idea that it's not just a passive experience. It's not like you just watching films and TV is not really a passive experience, but it's considered one. In comparison to video games, which is more active because you're actually controlling something that represents you. Your avatar. So there are all sorts of complicated ideas about whether you control your avatar or whether you are your avatar, but that's another kettle of fish altogether. The idea that the media represents representations of transgressive behaviour. Transgressive means to break societal laws and norms. So the idea that media representations of transgressive behaviour, like violence or physical aggression, can lead audience members to imitate those forms of behaviour. Of course, this brings on to the question of what is violence, but we'll leave that for another day. But that neatly leads on to, obviously, reception theory and Stuart Hall. So the idea that communication is a process involving encoding by producers and decoding by audiences. So what do the audience sort of make of these products, and what do the people who make these products want the audience to think of them? So there are three, as we remember, positions. There's the dominant or hegemonic position, also known as the preferred reading. The encoder's intended meaning. It's fully understood and accepted by the audience. We go, oh, that's what they meant. I get it. We accept it. The negotiated position, where the legitimacy of the encoder's message is acknowledged in general terms, although the message is adapted or negotiated to better fit the decoder's own individual experiences or context. So, these can be aberrant readings. They can be not what the creator intended at all. Could be things the creator never even thought of. Classic one we can think of lately is the way in which the Babadook has become something of a gay icon. Jennifer Kent, when she was making the Babadook, never meant it to be some analogy of the gay experience, but for some reason gay audiences latched on to the Babadook. And you can even get Pride, rainbow coloured Pride editions of the Babadook on Blu-ray. Got nothing to do with video games, it's just a good example. And then the oppositional position, where the encoder's message is understood, but the decoder disagrees with it, reading it in a contrary or oppositional way. This is usually political, say, like, I don't know, feminist readings or socialist readings or readings to do with things like you might consider something racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever. Notice none of these include the audience completely missing the encoder's point and totally misreading it. That's another kettle of fish altogether. Use that phrase a lot today, aren't I? Anyway, fandom, Henry Jenkins. This is one we haven't really looked at all. How do audiences react to these products? Now, that one I just mentioned about the fans of the Babadook, the gay fans of the Babadook, reappropriating it and having a completely different meaning. This is what we're talking about here. But Henry Jenkins talks about fandom and the idea that fans are active participants in the construction and the circulation of textual meanings. We're not just passive consumers. What we're really looking here is fan culture. The idea that fans appropriate texts and read them in ways that are not fully authorized by the media producers, the textual poaching element, like I was just talking about with the Babadook. The idea that fans construct their social and cultural identities through borrowing and inflecting mass culture images that are part of a participatory culture that has a vital social dimension. That's a good term, participatory culture. What we're talking about here is fan culture. So, you know, cosplay, /lit, on one level, you know, the kinds of people who will dress up as characters from Assassin's Creed and make Assassin's Creed 3 parkour videos, or they'll make their own little fan films. They will, you know, on one level, but there's also just kids playing, you know. So I don't know, when I was a little kid, you know, we'd be playing Star Wars in the playground and all arguing who was going to get to be Han Solo. And I'm sure that when you were kids, you might have been playing, I don't know, Harry Potter or something like that. Or you had whatever dolls and action figures you had, like I had Star Wars figures. That's all part of it too. You know, you're creating this, you know, you don't just play the video game. There's all these other things outside of it as well. You buy the merchandise, the action figures, the toys, the lunch boxes, the posters, you go, what's the movie, whatever. Okay? And then there's Clay Shirky's end of audience theory. The idea the internet and digital technologies have a profound effect on the relationship between media and the individuals. So to what degree do individuals have a way to talk back to the media? Is there any way that we have been able to influence, say, the Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation franchise, whatever? The idea of the conceptualization of an audience members as passive consumers of mass media content is no longer tenable in the age of the internet, as media consumers now become producers who speak back to the media in various ways, whilst creating and sharing content with one another. So as I said, that ties in with fan culture and the idea of participatory culture, that we can make our own content. But there's going to be fan forums, Facebook pages, Twitter accounts, YouTube videos. You know, there's going to be tons of stuff where people are able to engage with this product on something more than just a passive, just playing the game level. Right, okay. What specifically do we need to look at? There's a lot of stuff we need to cover. Right, so we've got to look at, for industries, the process of production, distribution and circulation by organizations, groups and individuals in a global context. So, who is making Assassin's Creed 3? How do they distribute it to the audiences? Also including in that, of course, the idea of distribution and consumption is different, or exchange is also known, is different now. We've got the streaming services. You know, once upon a time, Ubisoft would make Assassin's Creed, they distribute it on DVD. The consumer would go to whatever their favourite outlet was, like Game, for example, buy it, take it home, put it in a games console, play it. Now, of course, more and more games are streamed. More and more games have got online gaming as part of their core. So fewer and fewer games now are single-player experiences, much to my disgust, and more and more online community gaming. So, that's an element of this, and that's particularly true of Assassin's Creed 3, which was very much trying to take advantage of that. The specialised and institutional nature of media production, distribution, and circulation. So we're going to be looking at, the idea of, video games being very much a video game industry. It's very institutionalized, like anything else. It's dominated by a very small number of huge companies who are very much vertically and horizontally integrated. The relationship of recent technological changes of media production, distribution, and circulation. So as I said, the internet, the streaming, has changed the nature of what it means to be gaming, online multiplayer gaming, and that kind of stuff. The significance of the patterns of ownership and control, including conglomerate ownership, vertical integration, and diversification. So like I said, who does Ubisoft own? Is Ubisoft owned by somebody else? Who do they have partnerships with? Who do they work with? Etc., etc. The significance of economic factors, including commercial and not-for-profit public funding and media industries near their products. As I said, this comes down to ownership again in this case. It's not like they're not-for-profit. How media organisations maintain, including marketing, varieties of audiences, national and globally. So we're going to look at the marketing of Assassin's Creed 3, how it was advertised, who it was advertised to, what made it different from the other games in the franchise. We need to look at the regulatory framework of contemporary media in the UK. So, who regulates video games? How was this? Why do they regulate video games? How was this game regulated? How does that change, or how does it reflect or compare with how the game was regulated elsewhere in the world? We've got the impact of new digital technologies on media regulation, and how it's harder to regulate games or anything nowadays when you can get it from anywhere in the world, legitimately or via piracy. How processes of production, distribution, and circulation shape the products. So, what makes Assassin's Creed 3 different from other games in the franchise because of what platform it was available on. The PlayStation Vita. The impact of digital convergence. That's another Henry Jenkins is good for convergence, actually, because he talks about black box theory. Remember, it's just another name for convergence. So the impact of digitally convergent media platforms on media production, distribution, and circulation, including individual producers. So we're going to look at the PlayStation Vita and what made it different from other games consoles. The role of regulation in global production, distribution, and circulation. The effect of individual producers on media industries. We're going to look at like Ubisoft as a company. We've also got to look at how audiences are grouped and categorized. So, your NRS social scales and the sort of like psychographics, demographics, geodemographics, so age, gender, social class, lifestyle, taste, etc. And what was different about Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation in comparison to the other Assassin's Creed games in terms of this. How media producers target, attract, reach, or address and potentially construct audiences. So again, that's looking at the advertising really, isn't it? How media industries target audiences through the content and appeal of media products and through the ways in which they are marketed, distributed and circulated. And we're going to look at the interrelationship between media technologies and patterns of consumption and response. We already talked about that a lot, okay. How audiences interpret the media, including how and why audiences may interpret the same media in different ways. Assassin's Creed 3 came in for a lot of stick for not being very good. We'll also look at the way in which this is a game that did feature a black female protagonist, and that's the kind of thing that would have upset the your mainly white, cisgender, heterosexual, entitled, misogynistic, racist fanboys that haunt the internet. In particular, we'll look at the Gamergate scandals that are sort of related to that, I guess. we'll look at how audiences interact with the media and can be involved in media production. So I said, like fan theory. How specialist audiences can be reached on a national global scale through different technologies and platforms. So we'll look at that. Again, that's a Vita thing, really. How media organisations reflect the different needs of specialist and mass audiences through targeting. That kind of goes in what we already said about advertising. How audiences use media in different ways, reflecting demographic factors as well as aspects of identity and cultural capital. So, people identify themselves as gamers, don't they? So we make a living out of it. But we'll also think about, when we think of gamers, what are we thinking of? What kind of person is a gamer, and does the reality of that reflect our stereotype? So the role and significance of specialised audiences, including niche and fan to the media, and the way in which different audiences interpret reflect social, cultural, and historical circumstances. Right, so a lot of stuff to cover there. So where do we start? Bit of flip learning for you. Right, okay. There's the Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation set product fact sheets. Now that is available on Moodle. I will email it out to you as well to make life easier for you, but you can easily find that just by typing into Google. Go and find your information off there. There's the textbook, don't forget. So the pages 115 to 119 of the WJEC EduCast Media Studies for A-Level textbook cover this. And I've already put together an Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation YouTube playlist. On there at the moment, you will find some videos about the history of Assassin's Creed as a franchise. You will find trailers for the various games. You will see some videos about effects theory in video games. And I will be adding more and more videos to it as I get around to actually making them. So keep an eye on it and see what pops up. So, as I said, with the history of Assassin's Creed 3 videos on there, so you watch those. Well, I put that separately because it's in the playlist. I would recommend you watch all of it, but you particularly need to watch the bit about Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, obviously. And preferably the entire thing about Assassin's Creed 3. But if you at least watch between 21 minutes and 11 seconds and 23 minutes and 3 seconds at the very minimum. But I recommend you watch all of it so you've got a better understanding of what we're talking about. And as I said, it couldn't hurt to actually download and play Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation. As I said, it's available on the Steam network to be able to download, and I got it for about £7 because it was in the Easter sale. Don't know if it'll still be on sale. I bought it last year for the PlayStation 3. Never got around to playing it, but it cost me £3. So just have a look. You might be able to find it cheap. You never know, it might even be free, because I know that PlayStation have been giving a load of games free. You can just download for nothing during the coronavirus lockdown. But of course you might be listening to this in the future, in which case, sorry and all that. Anyway, that is the first video. I've rambled on for half an hour, but that's everything we're going to cover. Subsequent videos will be covering specific topics, and I will be drip feeding those out over the next week or so. If you've got any questions, you know where I am. Just drop me an email, but just start off with this basic flip learning stuff, and I will eventually send out some essay questions for you to do. Right, talk to you next time.